study of language and gender emerged as a serious field within linguistics in the 1970s, and it's generally thought of as a branch of sociolinguistics which studies the relationship of language to society and culture and history. But in recent years, the biggest debate that's emerged around the language use of men and women is really whether it is that sort of field, or whether the differences between men and women that we observe in their linguistic behaviour have some kind of biological basis. So recently, for instance, in 2011, a book's been published called Duels and Duets by John Locke, which makes very confident claims like this one. Men and women speak in fundamentally different ways, largely because they are outfitted by nature to do so. So for people like Locke, it's a matter of genes, hormones, the organisation, or as people like to say, the wiring of the human brain. Is this true? Well, I don't think the evidence is very good. On some of it, the jury's still out, but in other ways, it just isn't a very helpful way to look at the minutiae of linguistic behaviour. So I'm going to talk a bit about why I think that is. Okay, if you haven't been living on another planet for the last 20 years, you'll probably know what the story, the great popular story about differences between men and women is. The idea is that women on average are more verbally skilled than men, and that the two sexes have preferences for different types of behaviour. So women talk more than men and attach more importance to talking. Female conversation tends to be people-focused, collaborative and empathetic, whereas men treat talking either as a means of approaching practical tasks or as a kind of competitive sport. This is what I call the Mars and Venus view, after the self-help book Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. And it often goes along with the belief that the differences are natural, they're part of our genetic inheritance or a result of the way our brains work. So I'm going to explain why I and most other linguists take a different view. The research evidence doesn't support the most common beliefs about male-female linguistic differences, either what they actually are or what the best explanation for them is. Now, I'm not going to deny that there are gender-linked differences, and I don't think any linguist who'd studied them would deny that. On the contrary, there are many differences, but they're not the ones that are endlessly harped on in popular literature. As an illustration, consider the belief that women talk more than men. In 2006, a popular science book called The Female Brain went so far as to put some actual numbers on this difference. It said that women on average utter 20,000 words per day, whereas the male average is a paltry 7,000. This claim made headlines around the world, most of which were some variation on "science finally proves what we all knew all along." But on investigation, it turned out that there was no science. The figures had been lifted from a self-help book, whose author appeared to have plucked them out of thin air. After this was pointed out, some researchers in Arizona decided to try to settle the argument by conducting their own scientifically designed word-counting study. With a sample of almost 400 subjects who were recorded over several days, they found a lot of individual variation, different people had different numbers of words, but no significant gender difference at all. The mean number of words per day was approximately 16,000 for both sexes. For various reasons, linguists don't regard counting the words uttered in a certain time period as a very useful measure of group differences in talkativeness. But the Arizona findings did fit with what we already knew from studies that had used other measures. In casual talk among equals, men and women contribute about equally. In formal situations where status is a factor, most studies find men talking more than women. However, some studies have reported exceptions to this pattern, and these suggest that the explanation isn't directly about gender, it's about status. In situations where status is relevant, high status speakers, not surprisingly, tend to talk more than lower status speakers. Gender is indirectly relevant because in many formal situations there is still a tendency for men to outnumber women in the high status positions. The exceptions that I just mentioned were cases where either the highest ranking participants did happen to be women, or else the discussion was on a topic which both sexes considered a female area of expertise, and that meant that the men were more likely to defer to the women. I've focused on the inaccurate belief that women talk more than men because it is very entrenched in popular folklore. But if I had time, I could give a similar treatment to all the other generalisations that I spoke about at the beginning and that you find in popular literature about male-female differences. None of these generalisations is supported by good research evidence. And of course, that makes it pretty good evidence for those differences, and also that there are differences in the way male and female brains are organised for language. To that, I would say that the jury is still out. Some of the very strong claims we hear go well beyond what the